Hello, my name is Jackie Widin. I'm sitting here in my office in the University of Technology, Sydney, in Sydney, Australia, and I'm a senior lecturer in the TESOL and Linguistics Education Program. Today I'm going to talk with you about a book I recently wrote. It's Illegitimate Practices, Global English Language Education. Before I start to talk about what's in the book directly, I'd like to give you some background information about the context in which the book is set and what made me write about the book in the way that I do. For many years I've been involved in what is called in Australia international education, and this is where universities either offer programs offshore in countries outside of Australia or encourage and intake international students from those countries to study in Australia. And my involvement in this area of work has been fantastic and has really enriched my own academic life and my own academic teaching, and it's just broadened my own horizons. But there were many times that I felt quite uneasy about my involvement in this work, and at times compromised about selling Australian university education. The particular focus of my work was in English language teacher education. We've worked in a range of countries, Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, Japan, amongst others. And within all of these countries, the same threads of tensions would underlie a lot of our work in our projects. The projects were mainly aid-funded projects. They also had a university contribution, of course, and the funding of these projects became one of the key tensions in the work. Universities in Australia have been underfunded for many years, and so any source of funding was seen as an opportunity for the university, and we would often find ourselves in competition within the faculties around what resources were available for our work in these projects. And also within the host country project fields, there'd be some unease about what way funds were being distributed. So that was a major source of funding, of rather tension. Another area of tension was in the content of the programs that were being delivered and the way they were delivered. Due to the under-resourcing of our project work, we often found ourselves delivering programs that were delivered for our Australian-based students, and they weren't always necessarily suitable or appropriate for the students in countries outside of Australia. And also the methodologies that we were using were at times a source of tension. Another area was language, of course. What language, which language, where, when, what was the position of the languages of the host countries, and how were they negotiated within the projects. And also concepts of culture, like how we did what we did, why we did what we did, whose practices were able to dominate the project field. So those were areas of tensions that seem to flow through all our international work, and really for me highlighted the complexity of the international English language education project field. And as my work progressed in this area, I really started to question in whose interests the projects were working, and along with that question was the question of how can the benefits be more equally distributed in the projects. I had this rising doubt about where the resources were best being used, and of course as a university worker I wanted to look at how universities can be good international citizens. In this book I focus on two international English language projects. One was in Laos, an aid-funded project, and another in Japan, a fee-based project. That means students paid for their courses. I really was very interested in looking at how we negotiated effective relationships with our stakeholders, with all project participants, how these were productively negotiated, and how benefits were distributed. Initially, when I began this work and began my investigations, I sort of took on the rhetoric of the field, which was about the binary relationship between the donors who gave the resources and the recipients, those who received them. In this case, those recipients were teacher educators or ministries of education, and that the benefits would flow from the donors to the recipients. However, early on in my work, I realised, or came to realise, that the field was much more complicated than that. And I'd just like to quote for you a participant in one of the projects. He was actually the director of the agency in Australia that represented, the agency in Japan that represented Australia's interests in Japan, and he was involved with the setting up, establishment of the project in Japan. And he was talking about, from his perspective, what the purpose of the project was. And he said, the purpose of this particular project is not to deliver great, English language teaching methodology into Japan's teaching system. Actually, by doing that, we put many Australians out of a job. I mean, in 15 years' time, if great English is being taught here, then we're, Australians out of business. But it is to demonstrate Australia's ability to operate in an area that this country, Japan, is not accustomed to and not expecting in higher education. It is to enhance our reputation as a provider of education and training. The agency is after enhancing Australia's interest in Australia and Japan's relationship. So I couldn't care less whether this country, Japan, wants it or needs it or likes it. At the end of the day, it's not the judgment of the teachers. It is a decision we've made against the background of what would enhance Australia's interest. So for me, at that time, early on in my investigation, this was a revolutionary idea, that the interests were primarily around what Australia's reputation was in Japan, not about the good work we were doing in terms of English language teacher education. And I also realised then that perhaps within a project we're all striving for different goals. And while this may sound axiomatic to the field now, it was quite, it wasn't something as a project team that we were quite aware of as to what extent the benefits were disparate and the interests were disparate in the field. In terms of the story that I tell in the book about the projects, it's set also within the broader context of the growing marketisation of Australian tertiary education. This education is now Australia's third biggest export. The bulk of this, of course, is in the tertiary sector, as I've said, and the English language teaching is a significant component of this export. Aligned to the way that the export industry is organised, Australian universities have a key interest in their goal of internationalisation. This is a key strategic aim of most Australian universities. A close examination of this aim reveals it as a process of increasing the export market of Australian education. It is mostly a one-way process where in the end the Australian universities benefit from increased revenue and a global spread. This is perhaps not entirely clear from the name internationalisation, which suggests a two-way process. And clearly, as I say in the book, clearly the internationalisation of education is of great concern to those who advocate for human rights, language rights, equal distribution of wealth in the world, the sustainability of linguistic and cultural diversity. And in the book I present a multi-layered story of encounters, domination, subordination and strategic action in the international education arena. So I set the story of these two projects within this much broader context. In the telling of this story, I owe much to the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. I heavily draw on his explanatory devices of field, capital and habitus to examine the relationships in the project fields, to examine the power relationships between the stakeholders and participants and project workers outside of Australia. I look at the positions they occupied in the field and the benefits they accumulated or not. And this analytical framework really exposed some of the way that the field continued to work in the interests of the dominant partners. That is most usually the funders, the donors, the investors who have the resources to set up these projects. And while a lot of the project staff, academic staff, like myself and my colleagues, would continue to work within the aims and goals of the teaching programs, the key interests in the field would continue to work in the interests of the dominant players. And so what we often found, and this is actually shown in a lot of project work over the years over the world, is that the projects may fail in their key goals, but that doesn't mean they fail for everybody. So that the key goals of improvement, increased proficiency and those type of indicators may not be met, but the goals for the dominant players are clearly met. And so the book exposes how this works in the field. And one of the areas that most clearly works and most clearly shows the dynamics of the field is in the way language is positioned in the projects. The internationalisation of education and the internationalisation of English are clearly intertwined within these project fields. I take a critical view, as many others do, of the spread and role of English, and I draw on many writers in the area of TESOL and in the applied linguistics area to critique the way English is seen and positioned. But I also look at what interests might sort of substantiate and give a sort of fresh view on what the dynamics are around language in the projects. And I'm particularly interested in the role of the first language of the host countries, or first languages of the host countries, and to look at how those skills and proficiencies are not necessarily given the resources and stakes that they should be within the projects, and how we might better be able to have a truly bilateral project and a truly multilingual project, and also meet the goals of the teaching the target language. One of the other issues that come up for me in the exploration of these projects is the practices of project work that occur in the running of the English language projects, and how these practices of project work are hampered in their way of really bringing a much more bilateral, truly joint way of running projects that are proposedly for the benefit of the host country participants. In the conclusion to the book, I challenge a lot of the way that we traditionally set up these projects in countries outside of Australia, and I really think that this is a question for many other countries like Australia that run English language teaching projects over the world, as to how we can more fruitfully and productively run projects that work, well, not that work in a bilateral way. And so that means that we need to consider how the resources can be much more equally distributed and benefit all participants in the project, and not continue to benefit the dominant players in the projects. So I hope you enjoy reading the book, and I hope you think it benefits and your academic work, and benefits the way that we can much more fruitfully work in an international context. So thank you.